Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, the 32nd ASEAN Summit begins today in Singapore. How will the regional bloc enter a trade deal at a time of growing U.S. protectionism? And we speak to a Chinese entrepreneur who founded the online education company VIPKid. We find out how she is defusing U.S.-China trade tensions in her own way. You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. We begin our program today in Singapore, where the leaders of the 10-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, will gather from Wednesday to Saturday for the bloc's 32nd summit. The combined economies of ASEAN are the world's 6th largest market. Heads of the ASEAN states will discuss regional and international issues during the summit. Take a look at this.
The 32nd ASEAN Summit. This bloc covers a region of 650 million people, including major economies like Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Singapore succeeded the Philippines as this year's rotating chairman. The theme of this summit is Resilient and Innovative ASEAN.
We are now quite well placed in terms of our ability to go digital. The other thing that is important is that Southeast Asia is full of natural resources. In recent years, people are moving away from just oil and gas and the coal that we have in abundance. We are now looking into things that we can do well, for example, producing food.
ASEAN celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. In a recent ASEAN finance ministers meeting, Singapore's finance minister said the bloc was estimated to have grown by an impressive 5.1% in 2017 and is expected to outpace most other regions this year. The bloc has played a significant role in Asia-Pacific over the years, but recent trade tensions between the U.S. and China have led to a mix of fear and hope across Southeast Asia.
I think in the medium to long term, this sort of wake-up call, if you like, is good because it compels very significant structural shifts in the economic planning and activities of states, in particular here in ASEAN.
Faced with trade disputes, ASEAN has focused on speeding up its own economic integration, and the bloc is also engaged in making the regional body a global player.
Three-day summit. Can the ASEAN Summit deliver any groundbreaking results this year? With us to discuss that, we have quite a strong panel from China. We have Song Qingwen, Associate Professor from the Institute of South and Southeast Asian and Ocean Studies of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. In Singapore, we have Tian Wei, Adjunct Research Fellow at the National University of Singapore. In Thailand, in Bangkok, we are joined by Shang Buprakong, former advisor to the Thai government. And finally, in Washington, Anthony Nelson, Director of East Asia and Pacific Practice at Albright Stonebridge Group. I want to welcome to the four of you gentlemen, starting from Mr. Lim. This year, Singapore is hosting the summit while being the rotating chair of ASEAN. How much do you think, from a scholar's perspective, that countries and economies in the region will be able to reach a deal, particularly about a common consensus about where the international trade is going, given the ever-rising protectionism and the gestures recently from the United States?
I think on the top of the agenda, ASEAN countries in Singapore are going to discuss integration of smart cities across the region. Singapore is an example of a smart city. We try to use digital technologies for infrastructure and also use digital technologies to track the environment, and also to have research and development in cutting-edge technologies. All these are the makings of a smart city to attract talents to the city. And so Singapore doesn't want to be the only smart city within ASEAN, but to connect and integrate with other smart cities within ASEAN. And I think this is gaining a lot of traction as the main agenda in the ASEAN Summit.
So, Mr. Lim, if I understand right, that the ASEAN economies, despite of the fact that they are at the lower and the middle level of the global supply chain, is going to hide away from the real hot topic of the world, which is where is the trade going to go internationally, particularly given the recent trade disputes and tensions going on between some of the major economies. Some of those are really right there in the Asia-Pacific region. You're saying ASEAN this year is not going to focus any attention on those important issues. Then people would wonder, what is the legitimacy of ASEAN when it comes to discussing real important issues of the region, Mr. Lim?
I think ASEAN has a tradition of supporting free trade, and it is also a beneficiary of free trade and open trade, as with most East Asian economies. And many countries feel that it does not benefit anyone when there are trade frictions. And ASEAN has been a friend and trading partner of many major trading economies in the region. And that includes all the major powers like US, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, etc. So I think ASEAN wants to be able to work with all partners and to ensure that the infrastructure and also the environment is good for open and free trade.
Okay. Mr. Bukrakong, coming from Thailand, also an important member of ASEAN. Will ASEAN Summit this time be put under spotlight because of the regional and international trade issues? People would watch very closely as to what kind of consensus, what kind of statement, or what kind of agreement that the ASEAN economy this time would come out regarding trade. To what extent do you think the ASEAN economies are willing to express in this regard?
Well, we have 5 issues that have to be discussed in Singapore. Trade friction with the United States and China, which will affect our region a great deal. I think that most people don't realize that China is actually ASEAN, our biggest trader, even ahead of the United States. There's this type of conflict in the long term will affect us somewhat. We really don't know how much. But as far as other issues, because we are ASEAN, we believe in consensus, and it has stabilized the organization. We have solved larger issues, but issues that come up at hand, whether it's a Rohingya or whether it's external factor with China-United States trade, we have benefit from being China's neighbors. You know, our trade were upward almost 14% last year, and because of proximity, we believe that this trend would continue despite of some trade conflict, but we don't know the proportion, how will it work, would United States export to U.S. affect greatly, but I think that China to a certain extent will benefit from this conflict with ASEAN far more than United States, but we have to wait and see.
Well, a lot of things are fluid. That's why people come out with different attitudes and statements about what they support. It's not about picking the lines or the team where you want to join, but rather the basic principles that people want to hold on to when it comes to trade. Let me go to you, Mr. Song, here in Beijing. I'm not asking you to force your ASEAN friends to be standing in one team or the other, but rather I'm asking you from a scholar's perspective, how do you see the current realities, China and ASEAN trade? How big is the market for ASEAN countries when it comes to China? And what is going to be the ASEAN's role when it comes to China's future plan of international trade? Because now China is having this ever-diversified purchasing plan all over the world. Meanwhile, Mr. Song, China is also thinking about how to diversify the sources of international trade. For example, how to diversify what is already doing with the United States for the future. Mr. Song, what do you think?
Yeah, China is the biggest neighbor of ASEAN, and also China is the biggest trade partner for ASEAN, almost I think 80 years. So I just checked the figures about last year. China-ASEAN, the total trade according to China's statistics is about is more than $500 billion, and the growth rate is nearly 14%. This year, the first quarter, I think China-ASEAN trade is about $130 billion, and its growth is also robust, nearly 20%.
Okay,
so,
a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
For us, who is not the math major, what are you trying to say, sir?
Yeah. So and also, I think so. In the future, both China and ASEAN economic growth grows robustly. So I think in the future, the total trade volume this year and also in the next following years will become bigger.
Besides the numbers, there are a lot of things going on when it comes to trade. For example, earlier we have a lot of programs devoted to the discussion of two proposed trade blocs or trade deals, trade platforms, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for example, and the RCEP, the regional, that stands for R, which is the regional one. So have already courted the ASEAN nations for some time. 4 ASEAN nations have already signed the unratified TPP, while many others in the region have announced interest in joining. Meanwhile, the ASEAN nations are expected to sign the RCEP or RCEP agreement at November ASEAN Summit, along with 6 other neighbors, namely China, Japan, Korea, South Korea mainly, Australia, New Zealand, and India. RCEP, RCEP has gained more traction after the U.S. left the TPP. Of course, Mr. Nelson, you have been very attentively listening to your colleagues coming from Asia. From Washington's perspective, of course now, TPP is still out of the question, even though Japan and Australia talk about they are there in order to proceed with future preparations. How does the United States see the bloc of ASEAN when it comes to trade, and when trading policies and principles fundamentally change from the U.S. side, has Washington been thinking about the impact on their trading partners, even in Southeast Asia?
Well, ASEAN is an incredibly important market to the United States. It's the 4th largest export market for the U.S., the 5th largest trading partner. And if you look at investment, U.S. companies have about $274 billion invested in ASEAN, which is more than what they have in China, India, and Japan combined. The TPP was never meant to engage all of ASEAN, but it was meant to provide a kind of aspirational agreement that might signal the kind of trade agreements that the U.S. would like to work towards with other ASEAN countries. The Trump administration has been less interested in engaging multilaterally and much more focused on its bilateral relationships. In particular in ASEAN, they're concerned with trade deficits. The U.S. does trade a lot with ASEAN, but we see 4 of the largest trade deficits that the U.S. has with ASEAN countries. That's a really key bilateral priority for the Trump administration, and where they want discussions to go around. They want to encourage more purchases of U.S. goods. They want to encourage more market access. They're going to try to do that bilaterally if they can. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which does bring together about 50% of the world's population, isn't a high standards deal like the TPP was, but what it does do is provide a floor of commitment and put a little bit of force behind some of the ASEAN Economic Community commitments. Because as you know, ASEAN doesn't really have an enforcement mechanism to some of its commitments in economic integration.
Right.
So RCEP can kind of help add that and help complete the commitments that have already been agreed to.
Talking about whether Mr. Nelson, when he suggested that the United States want to quote-unquote correct the trade deficit with 4 of the countries in Southeast Asia, Mr. Bupakong, as well as Mr. Lim from Singapore, do you think the ASEAN countries will be able to do that? By the way, the reason why these countries come together is because they believe their economy, their size is relatively small, and therefore their bargaining power is relatively weak. However, when they come together, there's likely to be a bigger momentum for all the economies. even though they're at different development stages. So I want to invite the opinions of the other two gentlemen coming from ASEAN countries. Mr. Pakong, your view.
I believe that unless the Trump administration telegraph its intention a little bit more clear whether they want to pursue more bilateral, so Thailand could adjust. At this point, the current Thai government want to have a little bit of a clearer stance, but we prefer that we are considering joining the TPP already. So far, we want to stay within this mode, and in a way, President Trump seems to want to get back, but there are sort of a discussion within this administration, and we are waiting for that clarity stance. We welcome more trade. We have trade with the United States for almost 200 years, and will be our major partner. So as far as Thailand concerned, we welcome any type of negotiation with the U.S. so we could continue this benefit for both of our country.
It seems that, Mr. Lim, two things are in a way mind-boggling. One is what exactly is the approach that the U.S. want to have with the ASEAN countries, whether bilateral or multilateral. And secondly, whether some of the earlier proposed multilateral platforms, which has been denied by the Trump administration, then later picked up again about the interest, and then never really firmly expressed of coming or entering into, could become a big issue for ASEAN countries. From your perspective, particularly Singapore, service sector, extremely important. Your investment sector, all over the world, including in Asia, very important. How do you see that?
There are many initiatives in the service sector. Take the educational qualification, for example. There is a lot of consensus that eventually ASEAN countries is able to cross-recognize each other's educational qualifications, and this will help mobility of people, of talents, and of workers and expertise across the ASEAN country. And in December 2015, ASEAN countries have signed the ASEAN Economic Community, and all these signs point towards an intention for greater integration. And as a region, they welcome all forms of arrangement that promotes free trade. For example, both RCEP and CP, TPP or TPP. Countries like Singapore, for example, are in favor of both of them because they help to promote free trade. And so as a beneficiary of free trade for the past few decades, you can see that all these directions point towards the desire to have a greater free trade and to have greater mobility of talents. And in the most recent summit today, they're also going to talk about connectivity between smart cities. So all these are kind of consensus and discussion points for ASEAN countries.
Talking about the trade platform, there's also something called the RCEP that is actually being discussed among economies there. It is likely, according to some, that the principles of the RCEP basic document could come out later in the year. But Mr. Song, I don't know how mature is that suggestion about later this year, and what does it mean for ASEAN as a region, and also ASEAN's partnership with China and some of the other major economies?
Yeah. According to some sources, the ASEAN and some of its partners, 6 partners, wants to finish the negotiation at the end of this year. I think when the RCEP or RCEP is established, a very big trading bloc, I think nearly 40% of the total population of the whole world, or even half of the percent of the total population of the world, the big market, I think the regional economy now is robust. I think as the Philippine President Mr. Duterte said, Asia now is the engine of the world economy. So I think if Asia and its partners economy grows robust in the following years, the world economy will be stable and grows well.
All right. Mr. Nelson, we heard about the speeches given by Mr. Duterte and also Mr. Lee Hsien Loong coming from Singapore and the Philippines separately during the recently concluded Boao Forum. They talk about the growth engine of the world being Asia. But, of course, that is exclude the factor that there will be disturbing tensions and conflicts in the region. Mr. Nelson, how do you think when the Trump administration coming into the second year and the midterm election as well, and looking up to the next 2 years, that kinds of plan should be mapped out regarding its relationship with Asia, particularly on trade?
Yeah, I think it ought to be an incredibly important priority for the Trump administration. The Obama administration really made engaging with ASEAN an enormous priority in a way that was pretty unprecedented. And the Trump administration has certainly had that high-level engagement. Vice President Pence came to Indonesia and visited the ASEAN Secretariat. President Trump attended the East Asia Summit. But it hasn't been backed up by a sustained strategy for what the U.S. wants its relationship with ASEAN to look like. Without the TPP, there isn't that kind of guide star for what the economic relationship should be. And these transactional bilateral approaches looking at trade deficits and individual issues that come up don't really provide a long-term strategy. So it's important for the Trump administration, as a new Secretary of State comes in, and hopefully that'll bring along with it ambassadors to ASEAN, ambassadors to some of these key capitals, and a more sustained and clear engagement with the region.
I see. We only have less than 1 minute left. May I invite 20 or 15 seconds from every one of you, the other three gentlemen in the region. Belt and Road is an initiative put forward. Many of you are coming from countries that have signed up to it. So what is going to be the solution it could provide, or alternative it could provide? Mr. Lim, very briefly, 15 seconds if you can, sir.
The BRI is a project in connectivity, and the latest developments are seen in Laos and also in Thailand. So it will be a long-term project that will involve many ASEAN countries.
All right.
And connectivity is important to ASEAN.
Okay, Mr. Bokpakong, 15 seconds, sir.
I foresee some connectivity that has taken place last week. In fact, Mr. Ma has come in and invest and make it Alibaba with Thai government. So that platform should facilitate increased number of trade between the region.
All right. And Mr. Song, very briefly, 10 seconds if you can, sir.
Yeah. And China, ASEAN, and also other countries, when we built the Belt and Road, so we will promote the mutual investment and to promote the trade and also to promote the connectivity.
Okay.
So we will boost our economy.
All right. For now, I want to thank the four of you for being with us, because this is a fascinating issue, the issue of trade. Where is it going? Here in ASEAN countries and beyond. Thank you so much, Song Qinglin, Lin Tian Wei, Shang Bokpakong, and Anthony Nelson. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. And stay with us here on World Insight. Still to come on the program, we speak to a Chinese entrepreneur who founded the online education company and make it big already. We'll find out how she is revolutionizing the global education industry and try to provide jobs all over the world. Yes, you're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Our program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. China's online language learning market is very competitive, but Cindy Mi, the founder and CEO of online education company VIPKid, has gained a lot of attention. Cindy forged her own path from an early age. She left school at the age of 17, never finished her high school, and with her uncle co-founded a language teaching company where she spearheaded business development. During her conception of VIPKid, she challenged the conventional English teaching method. From its humble beginnings as a real-time tutoring firm aimed at China's tens of millions of 4 to 12 years old, the company has become one of China's leading education startups. and it's spreading around the world. Let's listen to Cindy explain why she left school so early and how she succeeded as an entrepreneur taking care of education. From a 17-year-old high school dropout to now one of the best and most well-known young entrepreneurs in China, many people wonder, what has this been, this magical transformation?
It's love of teaching, and I was an English learner myself, but at the same time I started teaching young children English, and then I felt myself fascinated with the experience that I want to spend time with them every day, that I chose to teach full-time. But also another reason is I didn't do quite well in middle school and high school in my math class.
That's very honest.
I was reading science fiction magazines in my math class, and from that moment on, I realized personalized learning is so important to every child that as an unsuccessful student, I probably should seek another way.
But did your parents agree?
Well, they didn't have a choice, because if I continued, I wouldn't be successful. And I think, to speak for the teachers, I think it's very hard for them to navigate around the classroom setting of 60 different students. It's really hard for them to try to help everyone.
So you joined your uncle?
Yes.
To establish another entrepreneurship. That's your earliest.
It's right.
What was it like for you to, at a young age, 17-year-old, trying to do business development, trying to spread the program onto different campuses? I mean, it must be quite an experience, I would assume.
It's actually a role of chief errand officer. You would see me in front of the school gates sending out flyers to parents at 7 a.m. in the morning, and then I'll be driving to different campuses to deliver lunch food for employees because they cannot afford to pay for their lunch boxes. And then I would be teaching in the evenings from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. And then I would be grading homework from 10 p.m. on, and I'll be reading my own books to learn from 12 a.m. on. So it's very exciting, I would say.
So that's 15 hours plus self-study.
I see that experience as a learning experience too.
But what was it like? I mean, when you were, giving out the flyers at the campus gate to the parents, people would ask you, well, little girl, you should go to school yourself instead of standing here.
I actually look similar age to what I am today. When I was 17, almost 20 years ago.
So you didn't have the problem?
I didn't have a problem. As a young person, you always want to look more mature and established.
Exactly.
And then, but then honestly, because I was an English teacher, so parents actually trusted me. But they asked me, oh, what is this program about? And then I told them my experience learning English, and they feel very convinced. And then I said, come and learn with me for 3 times. It's for free, and you get a little gift. And if you don't like it, you don't have to pay. So parents thought, there's nothing to lose. And then they let their children try. Everybody stayed.
So that's your earliest stage of entrepreneurship. What is the biggest challenge, and what is the biggest takeaway from that experience for you?
I guess the biggest challenge is knowing nothing at all. But then the biggest takeaway is also knowing that one would never know everything about anything. That allows me to always think about the customer values, what the student really want, and then learn while time goes in the different eras, and then teach myself and also learn with my team to adapt to the new era, new ages, and then meet the customer requirements of the new internet age, I would say.
Then you moved on to establish something of your own, which is the VIPKid. It must be very different, because at the very beginning, it was you with your uncle. He is this big guy, right? He has to be responsible for everything. But now it's something of your own. So what was it like at the very beginning of this entrepreneurship? Have you ever questioned about yourself? Is this going to be a successful model? Is this going to be long-term? Am I going to be responsible from the very beginning till the end for the people that I have persuaded?
For the first year and a half, what I did only is to be questioned and to question myself, because it's such a new model that I believed the customer value is shifting in the internet age. Student requirement is to find the best teacher. that requirement cannot be best met in a brick-and-mortar age. But now it comes to internet. How do I know a 5-year-old can stay in front of the computer for a few years and learn with the teacher? Can they establish that real connection?
Right.
And would the teacher be happy with her job working with VIPKid? So that's a lot of questions being asked by other people, and I constantly ask myself. So I figured there's nothing more important than to deploy and demo and to do it. So I started experimenting with the 4 students, and then that cohort gets to 200 year and a half. So with that real piloting, we get to understand that students, as young learners, love staying in front of computers and then talk to a teacher remotely, and they establish real connections. And teachers, on the other hand, in the U.S., love this working opportunity with VIPKid.
You have to constantly innovate the business model, because business model is very easy to copy. Of course, you've got a big database of teachers, of students, and word of mouth, but those could be copyable as well. So here's the thing. Are you always in a process of being pressured, in a way, to move forward? And how to do that on a daily basis?
What drives the team and me growing every day is the true feedback from our customers, understanding what they really need and want. And that gives us, I would say, a lot of work to do, because there are so many of them, right? But the thing is, we're busy, but we're not panicking. We're taking our time building the foundation of the business, which is to make sure that we meet with the needs of the parents. But we make mistakes, and then we acknowledge it, and we make improvements.
Right.
So it's a, I would say, again, shared future, very different from all the other business, I guess.
But you've got a lot of demands coming from different sides. You also got complaints, you've got compliments. The thing is how to prioritize, always. So to you, what has been your experience as a Chinese entrepreneur?
For me, I always prioritize based on customer requirements, customer value. And so let me give you an example.
Give me an example, yes.
When we started build the business for the first almost 2 years, we didn't really have a proper website, nor phone apps, nor anything that is fancy. But then we make sure every teacher we selected are the best. We selected from the K-12 teachers, the professional English teachers in the U.S., which is 10 times better than anyone who can just speak English. And then we make sure we have only 5% of the admission rate. And it's a lot of work on this side. But by building that supply side guarantees quality of a product service, which is what parents value the most.
Cindy Min, an entrepreneur coming from China, focusing on English teaching here in this very large market of the country. The China-U.S. trade tension has proceeded, however, but both sides are expressing recently optimism that a deal could be reached. U.S. President Donald Trump announced that Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and other U.S. trade officials would soon travel to China to resolve the trade dispute. As Cindy is an entrepreneur doing business here in China and also in the United States, in fact, linking the two countries together, was she ever concerned that her venture would be affected? Let's listen in to what she had to say. Cindy, you know very well now the China-U.S. trade conflict, in a way, has been escalated over the past few weeks. I just wonder, how is that likely to impact your business? Have you ever thought about that?
I would say our teachers are from the heart of the U.S., mostly on the states like Texas, Utah, Florida. Those are places where teachers need teaching opportunity the most. They're making anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 US a year. That is very, very, very little.
Yeah.
And they can be very hardworking, but as a teacher, where do you find a job in those states? There's no other industries or manufacturing businesses, and the only thing they get is retail. And now online retail takes away a lot of the opportunities. And teachers are desperate. They wanted some opportunity. They can work hard. They don't mind getting up 4 a.m. in the morning. They're so hardworking and amazing and the best that they deserve the best opportunities. So when VIPKid came to the teachers, it's life-changing. I was in Utah 4 weeks ago. We had a teacher journey conference. 250 of them gathered on their own expense to join this teacher conference. And one teacher drove all the way from Colorado, 10 hours drive, because she cannot afford a plane ticket. A few dozens came to me in tears, and they hugged me and they said, VIPKid changed my life, saved my marriage, saved my kids. I think there's a lot of more important and beautiful things in people-to-people communications that are so critical to our next generations.
Right.
What about children in the U.S. and children in China growing up loving each other and have this mutual understanding that we're in this world future together, and we need to work together to build
but
our
as the
future.
trade conflict continues, obviously there's likely to be some bad feelings increasing from both sides.
We're
toward
definitely
one
bringing the
another.
good ones to the U.S. We're creating teaching opportunities, the state
Are you
legislation.
concerned that your business, or your business model might be hampered as a result of escalation of trade tensions?
I think we can probably ease the tensions by the fact that we're providing teaching opportunities. Teachers are paying more tax to the states, and we file with RIS every year. So there are a lot of good things we're bringing about having the mutual understanding.
When nationalism is on the rise, when protectionism is on the rise, a lot of things could be different, and things could go sour as well. So what I'm asking is, as an entrepreneur, how are you prepared for some of the possibilities and scenarios?
Absolutely. I guess the key is, again, to win the heart and minds of our teachers, to make sure we're at their service, that we're encouraging their success.
Is this thing keeping you up at night? I mean, these days, that the things between China and the United States, would this conflict keep you up at night, thinking about what's next?
It worries me more long-term than a short-term impact. I would say long-term, how can we make the world a better place, encouraging kids love each other, teacher love each other, right? But then short-term, I would say our teachers are the one they're the one with votes. So they are actually, I think, very powerful in the dialogue. And now we need to make sure that they're taken care of and their succeed is guaranteed in a way that our platform is built.
As a young entrepreneur, you're not only facing how to build the business, but also what about your own personal destiny vis-a-vis the fate of the company? So to you, as an entrepreneur, what are the things you value the most in a business that you're building? How do you see case studies like this popping up here and there around you?
Investors I get on board, I always talk to them and share with them extensively about that mission and vision and ask them, so do you care about education at all? If you think e-commerce in the past 20 years has changed the world, and now 10% on the world average is online, 15% in China, do you believe that education as a $6 trillion business, both in schools and after school tutoring, can later on be online? And is there a big opportunity, bigger or as big in e-commerce?
But belief is one thing. When it comes to real cash and real money, it's another thing. So when it comes to the critical point of making the decisions, things might change.
When it comes to all these discussions, I always ask my investors, so do you believe me or not? If you believe me, here's the way.
You sign the contract.
No, I want to make sure that before they sign, they understand what they're getting into. It's much better than after they sign, you go back and ask them, so this is the real dream. The IPO is a dream I promised you. The IPO is not the dream now. It's another dream. So what I always share with my investors are, we don't have plans to go IPO very soon. We need to build this business. We want to help millions of kids, and we want to make sure that we invest in AI, we invest in building our teacher training, we invest in the best content. This takes time.
Things are changing very fast in China, particularly.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of mergers and acquisitions over the past few years, these fast companies. Yeah. When they grow really like a gigantic monster, they also acquire smaller fast companies. So do you feel, in a way, vulnerable? To a certain extent, your fate and the fate of your business is not really in your hand, even though you have beautiful legal documents there.
Oh, it's all there. That's the most important thing, because that shows the dedication of my investor going a long way with me and my team. The same thing, when they get on board, I just ask them, so why are you at VIPKid? If you're here for money, you know, not that fast.
So that will
but
work.
It could be
so you have full
really
confidence that will work.
Yeah. So they need to be all in. They need to give it all. They need to stay with us for a long time. But then the return can be really a lot of times instead of just a few times.
Right. Have you ever thought about 5 or 10 years from now, what are I going to be up to?
Yeah.
Still this business or something else?
This, the same thing. I think this takes more than 5 to 10 years. This takes the next 20, 50 years. And I'll be really fortunate if I can be part of the future in the education that my team and I have envisioned. So I would think access and equity are the 2 keywords. What if we can build this global cloud-based classroom for all the children at all demographics for the globe? So 1 million, 5 million, 10 million. Some students can learn one-on-one, some learn one-on-4,
right.
Some can learn for free in our rural education program. I could totally see a shared education future where for the rural programs, teachers can totally teach for free.
Oh, that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.